Okay, so we're going to talk about the miracles of the American Revolution, and it's talked about in your Bible. We're going to go through those verses, okay, so that you'll see that it is talked about in the Bible, but there's a whole lot more to it than that. And so we're going to go through Ezekiel 16. All right, I'm ready. Now, okay, so we're going to talk about the book of Ezekiel. And when was it written? Okay, when was it written? It was written somewhere around the time of his captivity. So he went in, there was three captivities of Judah. And Judah was taken down by who? Somebody tell me. Dan, who was Judah taken down by? Babylon, right?
Babylon, yes.
Yes, thank you. So Israel had fallen in 722 BC. Judah, there's a lot of discrepancy around Judah. They began falling in 597, I think, BC. But it was three captivities. And so Ezekiel was taken out in the first captivity. And history tells you he was by the Kabar River. Okay, now the Kabar River, they think it's near Tel Aviv, but it's also in the land, in the land of Iran. And then some people say it's in the land of Iraq. Okay, that it's near Iraq, but it definitely it definitely was during this time of captivity that Ezekiel was taken out. So he's writing to the house of Israel. His writings, he talks about how he writes to the house of Israel. So you got to ask yourself, why is he writing to the house of Israel? That's the real question. 125 years after she's already fallen, and he's in the middle of the fall of Babylon. Do y'all understand that question? So, which Israel is he talking to? Because he certainly is not talking to the Israel that had fallen 125 years before. He's got to be talking to a future Israel. Do y'all understand that? Okay. So these are the things you need to know so that you can explain to people, because they think these books are already done away. See, this is when he wrote the book, was somewhere around 597, because he's sitting at the river in Babylon when he's writing. Okay. And this would be when King Nebuchadnezzar came in, and the king Jehoiachin was also taken. And they took that's probably when they took Daniel and some of those out. Now, Ezekiel would have been a little older. He would have been a little older because Daniel was in his teens. He was a young man, maybe possibly 20. He wasn't very old. And in Jerusalem, they fell the first time in 597 BC. That's the fall they're talking about here. So it happened in March. And so, yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's why when you read this book, you know that it can't be talking about the Israel that happened then. So let's move on here. All right, so we're going to start here. Now, remember when America was founded. In the 1600s, the people began to pour in. They started pouring into America in the 1600s. All right, so at that same time, you had the war, the 30-year war going on. That was the war in Europe between the Protestants and the Catholics. And it started in Bohemia. And the king was called King Frederick. And he was going to push everybody and force them to go under the Catholic Church. And they refused to do it. And I believe, this is my personal belief, this is the reason why these people were willing to die for their beliefs, is the reason why the Father allowed this land to open up and give them a place of protection and rest from all that war that has been going on in Europe year after year after year after year. Europeans are warlike people. And so I think he was giving them a rest from it. They were not going to go back under the Catholic Church. There were some things that they had given up, One was Christmas. They did not worship on, they did not do Christmas. I mean, that even in the beginning of this country, they didn't do Christmas. But they hadn't turned completely back to him because they didn't have that knowledge. You understand, they didn't have that knowledge. So he's talking to Jerusalem here. And we know that there's more than one Jerusalem talked about in the Bible. That's a promised land. And so I think this Jerusalem they're talking about here is America, says, know her abominations. So we're going in through this, and it says she was born in the captivity in the land of Canaan, and her father was an Amorite, and his mother was a Hittite. They're still in pagan ways. They are still practicing pagan, beliefs because they don't know any better. So that's why he's saying this. All right, so going on. So in verse 4, and as for the captivity, the day that thou was born, their nativity was not cut, they were not washed to supplement thee, and they were not salted, and they were not swaddled at all. So in their birth, they weren't taken care of. In the beginning of this country, they came here. I mean, they came here as just like refugees. I mean, they just fled to this place like refugees just to get away from that war, because 5 million people minimum died in that war in Europe, that 30 years war. Now, these people were serious as a heart attack. They were not going to go under the Catholic regime anymore. They were not going to do it. And because their heart had turned, and this is my opinion, because their heart had turned, the Father opened this land up to them. And that's why the Europeans began to flood in here. And so going on, I want to talk more about not being salted and not being washed, because he's going to wash them. And it says their navel was not cut. So they were just ragtag little people. This nation, and I'm going to prove to you that it's this nation, and you're going to know once I go through this, that is not talking about the land in the Middle East. That is talking about this nation, because there's things in this chapter that can't be applied to Israel in the Middle East. And I'm going to prove them to you, and I'm going to show it to you. All right, so here he's talking about the salt covenant that David had received, a salt covenant. So I'm not that up on the salt covenant, but I know that's a special anointing. Okay, that's a special anointing. So these people that came, they didn't have any of that. You understand? He's saying you came as like a little ragtag bunch, and you didn't have any of this. And so going on, Ezekiel 16 verse 5, neither I pitied thee, do any of these unto thee, have compassion on thee, and thou hast cast open in the field to the lofty of thy people in the day that thou was born. So he's talking about a birth of a nation. I'm going to prove that to you. And he said, the time that you came in, you were just thrown into the field. And that's true, because the pilgrims came in, and they had not, it was not like they can say, well, I'm going to go down to Walmart's and buy what I need, right? No, whatever they brought with them is what they had and what they could trade with the Indians. Okay, now 16:6, and it came to, and I passed by thee. This is what I'm going to talk about the entire time. I passed by thee, and I saw you polluted in your blood, because they had just came out of the war of 30 years war, if I could talk. They had just come out of it, and now they're in this country, and now he's talking about the American Revolution right here. And I said unto thee, when thou was in thy blood, so they were at war, live ye, and I said unto thee, thou wast in thy blood, live. He said it twice, because there was 2 wars. One was the American Revolution. The next one was the War of 1812. He won both of those wars. Nobody gives the Father credit, but he's the one that won these wars. All right, Ezekiel 13. And so now he's beginning to talk about this country. And how do I know that it's his country? We're going to see this. It said, I've decked you with gold and silver. I've given you fine linen, silk, broad work. I've given you fine foods, flour, honey, oil, and thou are exceedingly beautiful. Can you say that about the land in the Middle East, that she's exceedingly beautiful? I don't think so. You know, half of it's desert. And thou didst prosper in a kingdom. See, that's what I'm trying to tell you. The birth that he's talking about here is a kingdom. It is a nation. Y'all follow me? That's what this is about. And it's not just America. He's talking about Canada here, because Canada is being born at the same time. Now, it came to pass after all thy wickedness, woe, woe. The first two woes are for us in the book of Revelations. How significant is this? Said unto thee, the Lord thy God, and thou shalt build an eminent place. All right, so what is the eminent place? Somebody tell me what the eminent place is in this country that we built.
The capital.
The capital, thank you very much. And that will make high places, that's your churches on every street. You go through, you know, especially the small cities, and you'll see churches everywhere. There's churches on every street, especially all the main streets, right? There's churches everywhere. And so this is what he's saying. Is that true in the land of Israel? Probably not. And so this is what I'm talking to you about. This is why so many people are upset in this country, because they can't get the things they need, but we're giving it to all these foreign countries. We're giving all this aid to these foreign countries in return for whatever we decide we want from them. And so that's, if you read scripture, he says, do not make covenants and contracts with foreign lands. He says, don't do it. Now, that doesn't mean you can't do a trade deal, but he's talking about don't enter into covenants and contracts with these people. And that's very plain through scripture. But we've done it. We've entered into it with all of these people. And that is specifically talking about the Israel in the Middle East, and it has increased thy whoredom and provoked me to anger. So that whoredom is a whole different ballgame there, because now we are paying money to countries to get them to do what we want them to do. And that's what he's talking about. That's part of what he's talking about. Now, Ezekiel 16:31, and in thou buildest thy intimate place. That is talking about our courthouses here, in the head of every way. So in other words, the main streets in your cities are going to have a courthouse. That's what it's talking about here. And make it thy high place. Still, you see, it's talking about those high places. Those are churches in every street. And now verse 32, as a wife has committed adultery and has taken strangers instead of her husband. So this is a touchy subject, because this is talking about women marrying foreigners. Because once you marry a foreigner, you engage in their beliefs and their belief systems and bring them into fruition. And so this is part of what he's talking about here. But there's also a spiritual connection, that the people are not in a relationship with the Father. They're in a relationship with money mainly, which is their God, which is Baal. But it says, you see, which taketh strangers instead of her husband. That's a religious statement there, right there. They've taken they've taken other relationships and built other relationships with things instead of the relationship with the Messiah. All right, now we're going to get to this part here where he starts talking specifically because of thy filthiness was poured out and thy nakedness was discovered through thy whoredoms with thy lovers. That is the people they've in contract with in these nations, with all the idols of their abominations and the blood of their children which they have given them. Though that gets into the children that are being killed in this nation, some by abortion. 73 million was the last count, I think, since they started Roe versus Wade. All right, now watch this statement here. Verse 37, behold, there I will gather all thy lovers whom thou hast taken pleasure, and all of them that thou hast loved. That's all your idols, the things that you put above the Father, with all of them that has hated, and I will gather them around about against thee, and I will discover thy nakedness, and thou will see thy filthy nakedness. No, what it's saying here, that he's going to gather all of these nations that we have made contracts with and we've made agreements with, and they're going to turn against us and they're going to be around us. Do y'all see that? They're going to be around us. Gather them around against thee. That never happened in Israel. They had first Assyria came against them, and then they had Babylon come against them, but they didn't have all the nations of the world come against them. They didn't. So who is this talking to? Because it can't be Israel. It's impossible for it to be Israel because this never happened. All of these things where it talks about gathering all these nations that you've dealt with and they're going to come against you, that didn't happen in Israel. It didn't happen. They didn't get scattered to all the worlds. They were taken into captivity in Assyria. They were taken into captivity in Babylon. They were not scattered to all the nations in the world. The history doesn't back it up. Okay, so this is talking to our country. It's talking to, and the fact that Ezekiel was writing 125 years after they had already gone into captivity, and he's writing to Israel. All right, so going on. Now here is where I want to really touch hard, because thou hast not remembered the days of your youth. Now that goes all the way back to the time that they made that covenant at Mount Sinai. They didn't remember it. They don't know they're Israel, so they don't remember it. But in the very beginning of this country, they had such a heart for worshiping God. They didn't do it properly. That's what he's telling you. Their father was a Hittite and their mother was an Amorite. See, they were not converted in the sense that we are today, turning ourselves back to Torah. So it went on, and it says, I will recompense thy ways in thy head, and thou shalt not commit the lewdness above all these abominations. So it says, because you didn't remember me in your youth, you didn't remember. Going on, and their elder sister is Samaria, and we are Samaria. You can go back to Amos 6, verse 1. It tells you who Samaria is. And she has daughters that dwell on the left-hand side. So on the left-hand side, it's talking about, depending where you're standing, right? The left-hand side is talking about Europe. And it says that younger sister that dwells on the right-hand side, that's us. We're the younger sister dwelling on the right-hand side. And it says, is Sodom and her daughters. Okay, so he's really referring to America as Samaria, excuse me, and he's calling the European nation Sodom. Do y'all see that? Neither has Samaria committed half of thy sins. So Europe is a whole lot more wicked than we are as a nation, but we have this government that is so unbelievably corrupt that the Father says, I can't heal Israel because of Ephraim, because of our national sins. Our national sins are so wicked. But he's saying on a level of comparing the people in Europe to us, we haven't committed half the sins they have. That's what it's saying right here. I have multiplied thy abominations more than they, and justified thy sisters in thy abominations of what thou hast done. Going on. And I shall bring again their captivity, the captivity of Sodom and her daughters, and the captivity of Samaria and her daughters. So he's saying America goes into captivity and Sodom goes into captivity, which is Europe. So now when you go to read it, you know what in the world it's talking about. And bring the captivity of thy captives in the midst of them. I'm going to bring the people in to take you out. That's what he's saying. He's not mixing words here. Neither will I remember the covenant with thee in the days of thy youth, and I established unto thee an everlasting covenant. Now that goes twofold. It goes back to the covenant that he made at Mount Sinai with the people, but he also comes back to the covenant that they made when they first came here. In her beginning, he intervened for her. He passed by her when he saw her in her blood. Remember that? I read you that. So we're going to go through and show you that the Father won the American Revolution, that we really were just there. And we're going to go through. Now, Carl Dillenbach, I took his teachings that he'd done on the miracles of the American Revolution, and we're going to play them.
And now Washington has now just newly been commissioned as commander-in-chief of the army. And the first thing he does is he goes to Boston. Now, he brings in his army, 20,000 strong, across Boston Harbor. They lay out a siege plan because Washington wants to take back the city of Boston from Lord Howe and the British. Unbeknownst to both of these people at the time, that is, the British and the Americans, the British are bringing up a massive squadron of ships, men, supplies, equipment to back up Lord Howe at Boston. Washington lays in for a long siege, but he needs guns, and he has no high ground. His plan is to storm the city. The only high parcel of ground is Dorchester Heights. And if you look on a map, you will see that it's right across Boston Harbor. The problem is it's in full view of the British, who can easily annihilate with cannon fire of the heights. So they're really kind of stymied. And the harbor's not very big. It's tough. You have to have your weaponry on top of the ridge to even stand a chance. Washington's got no guns. Winter sets in, and I think it was General Knox says, listen, why don't I go up to Ticonderoga? The fort is empty. I'll just pick up some artillery and I'll bring it back. So he makes a 200-mile trek through the wilderness up to Ticonderoga, which is in New York State. He gets a bunch, 120 tons, in fact, of mortars and cannon. Well, how was he going to get them back through the woods? Well, it snowed, more snow than they had seen, and that early in a long time. So what does he do? He makes sleds, and he is able to transport the guns back to Boston in time for Washington to use them.
Wow. So you could see God's hand in these things, can't you?
Yes, but it gets better than that. Okay, now we still have the same problem with Dorchester Heights. We have to get the guns up on top of the hill so that they have a strategic gun position. So how do you do that without getting yourself blown to kingdom come, just trying to get them up the hill? A fog appears and covers the bottom half of the hill at Dorchester, but leaves the top of the hill open in the moonlight. Above the fog bank and above it, the top portion of the hill is sitting in a brilliant full moon. So under the cover of the fog, in full view of the British, so all night long, Washington gets his men, up 3/4 of the back of the mountain. And then as dawn breaks, everybody's asleep now because they think nothing's going on. Washington makes it to the top. When the British wake up the next morning, there are all these guns from Ticonderoga sitting on top of the hill along with batteries, and they're all aiming down their throat.
Amazing.
So he orders an assault. He gets his men in the boats, and all they got to do is row across the harbor. But what happens? A hurricane comes up.
Wow.
The boats can't go anywhere. They can't do anything. His assault is just turned back. He tries a second time and a third time, and each time he's forced back by the sudden wind of hurricane force winds that just rock everything in the harbor, and he can't move. So
well, now let me ask you, what time of the year was this?
they
You don't usually have hurricanes in the winter. That's why
well,
I'm asking.
who ever heard of a hurricane in March? No.
So,
Now, Howe is looking at this. He decides to leave Boston. Howe is sitting there. He's got these guns down his throat. He can't get his troops across. Washington is thinking, I should invade Boston. What he does is he figures he's going to counterattack and take the city of Boston. All right. Washington gets down to put his troops in a boat, and the wind shifts. So now he can't get across. So he's stuck over there in Dorchester. And Howe says, well, this is a perfect time. I'm getting out of Dodge. So he gets his troops, and they up to Boston. Now, Washington is really upset. He is, he's beside himself. He had this opportunity to have this tremendous victory, and it was denied him. He did not know that the English fleet was close on the heels. Had he gone in there and fought a battle with the British, he would have been annihilated.
wow.
His army would have been annihilated. The British would have come in, closed the back door, and that would have been the end of it.
Right.
Just reinforcements that were coming up from the Chesapeake.
So he had no way of knowing that, but God understood what was happening, so he prevented him from going in.
Exactly. You know, it's funny. God even protected us from ourselves.
No.
And he's done that more times than you can shake a stick at. Anyway, okay, Lord Howe goes to New York, takes over New York. And these are just possessions. There's no fighting going on. They just walk in and take over. People have often said that the American Revolution was fought by 1/3 of the population and won by 1/3 of the population. And indeed it was. 1/3 roughly didn't care one way or the other. 1/3 were pro-British, and only about 1/3 of the colonies were pro-independence. That really shows you something. So anyway, Washington, with his army intact, marches to New York. And Washington digs in. This is funny. Washington is outnumbered, but he's got the outland. He pretty much like what happened in Boston. During this portion of it, the reinforcements have caught up with Lord Howe. He's got 400 ships. During this portion of it, the reinforcements have caught up with Lord Howe. He's got 400 ships. And at least 70 of those are what they call ships of the line.
Wow.
Ship of the line has had over 100 guns, had a crew of over 1,000 men. They were gigantic. They were these ships that you see are just layers and layers of gun layers of cannon going up the side. Over 70 of the ships that he had 50 guns or more. And he had 30,000 troops, which was 10,000 more than Washington had, but it was really much more than that because Washington's troops were a bunch of farm boys.
Right.
You know, they had enlisted for 3 months. They had to be back to harvest. They plant their crop, they go to war, they come home to harvest the crop. This is very, very important because this was Washington's mantra throughout the entire war, from the beginning to the end. He ordered his troops to pray. He ordered them to go to church. He constantly appealing to them, We need blessings of God Almighty. We need the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob to be with us. Therefore, conduct yourselves in a holy manner as befitting an army dedicated to the service of God. These were general orders that he made over and over. Go to church on the Sabbath. Stay away from the loose women when you're in the city. Be fair in your dealings with people. Do not steal. Do not loot. Do not do any of these things. And it is amazing, but the army complied. There were people, they would go into Tory villages. Tories were loyalists to the crown.
Right.
One of the comments that they would say when they left, this was an army they never expected to see. These were men who respected their homes, respected their livestock, respected their crops.
Okay, so
in 1775, we come to the story of Bunker Hill. We come to the story of Bunker Hill. The Lord.
All right, so now we're going to get to the next one. And so that, do you see how the Father changed the weather? He made it foggy so that they could actually climb up the hill that they needed to bring all the weapons up on. And they were able to do it because there was a fog that set in. And so they climbed up part the way, and then at the morning, they just moved everything on all the way up. And so how interesting that the Father allowed that to happen. Then they couldn't come to attack Washington on that hill because the strong winds from a storm prevented them from coming, from them being able to go. So they tried 3 times and they weren't able to get across the river, the harbor. So, I mean, these are things that the Father controls, and I can show you through history how many times this happened with Israel. I mean, and we still want to say, well, we won the war. Well, no, you didn't win it. You know, you were there, yes, but the Father really won these wars. And that's what he meant when he said that I saw you in your blood and I passed by you. That's what that means. Now we're going to go to this battle of Long Island and Valley Forge, okay?
And now, finally, things came to a head with the Battle of Long Island. The Battle of Long Island was a disastrous defeat. There's 30,000 trained professional soldiers against 20,000 farm boys. We started off winning the battle. Lee lost the battle and wound up being captured. And now George Washington rallied the troops, brought them back into the battle on his horse in front of his men. Again, all the British were going, that's Washington, shoot him. And they couldn't hit him. The man went through the entire Revolutionary War, 8 years. He was involved at the head of his troops in every major battle and never got a scratch.
God was definitely with him.
There was no question about it. No question. We were trapped on Long Island, and we had to get across the river into Pennsylvania. More troops coming up from Boston were in hot pursuit of Washington. Washington was trapped in Long Island. The war was over. That was it. He was outnumbered like 3-1 by the time these two forces came together. That was it. It was all she wrote, except for one thing, God's intervention. Washington orders the fires to be lit, people playing banjos, people playing guitars, singing around the fire, and he gives the impression that the army is camped in for the night. Meanwhile, he starts pulling his troops to the boats to get them across the river. But it's another one of these nights he's going to be seen. What happens? A fog sets in. A fog sets in, and you can see through the fog the lights of the campfires. The British could see that, but they couldn't see George Washington pulling his army out across the river into Pennsylvania in the dark of the night. And finally, as the dawn breaks, the British realize that they've been had. Well, the British get their boats and they're ready to go give pursuit. What happens? Another storm. and they're stuck on the other side. Washington makes his escape. He suffered no casualties. First of all, when they get over, most of his men decide to go home. The army is really broken to pieces. He had 20,000 men. What he didn't lose in the battle in Long Island, he lost through desertion, and nobody was re-enlisting. Everybody left except for 3,000 men.
So what does that remind you of?
Gideon. Just as God whittled down to 1/3 the army of Gideon so that he could show his power, he did the same thing with Washington. He numbered his men down to 3,000. These were the bravest of the brave. Now, you got to remember, this is November now, 1776. The war is over. We've lost. King George issued an ultimatum: give it up, go back home, all is forgiven, go back home. Their lands would not be confiscated, their homes would not be burned, nobody's going to go to jail. In fact, George went one step further. He said, listen, all the grievances that you had against us, we'll settle them in favor of you. Okay, no more taxations. All right, you can have your own government, and we'll give you Commonwealth status. You won't be a colony anymore. You'll have your own government. You'll just be tied to Britain. Who in their right mind would reject such an offer? They all did. And that was the whole story. Now, Adams really put it really interestingly. He said, listen, we're not fighting a war just for ourselves. We're fighting a war for mankind. When we win our independence, and all of mankind will benefit, our revolution had a profound effect on this planet. But here's the deal here. The war was lost. 3,000 men against what? 30, probably 50,000 men, because the army was coming up from one road from Boston and another from Long Island, from New York, heading towards them, pushing them farther, farther back. And this is in 1776 November. All right. Into the month of December. It's cold. These guys have got no clothes. Congress hasn't sent them anything. No money, no food, no weapons, no nothing. And there they are on the brink. Washington says no. Dismisses the amnesty agreement. Up to this point, if Washington had been caught, he'd have been hanged probably in New York or someplace publicly, and that would have been the end of it. But because he turned down the king's offer, he committed high treason on the highest level, which means that he had a very good possibility, and Washington knew this, of being arrested, taken to London, and at the time, the penalty was to be drawn and quartered. That's a pretty awful way to go. According to my tour guide at the Dublin jail, during the 1920s, they were still drawing and quartering some of the more severe Irish dissidents. And that is what these Christian people were doing in England. You would have thought that had gone during the Middle Ages. Would say, listen, you're my people and I love you, but this sort of thing, I can't abide it. If my word is going to go out, it has to go through a free people. But anyway, people accuse Thomas Jefferson of being an atheist, and that's only because he had arguments with his church. He had arguments with his church because his church was the Episcopal Church, and he read his Bible, and he found things in the Bible that didn't agree with the church. He once made the statement that the biggest problem of Christianity was the church.
Exactly.
You know?
It still is.
It still is. So, anyway, there we are. Several religious leaders, reverends from the pulpit, one of them being Eldridge Gary, said at this time that the revolution was a holy cause. It was granted by favor of God. The British boot on our neck, and we're saying, you give up yet? We were fanatical in the fact that we were on a mission from God, that the revolution was a mission from God, and that we were going to win no matter what.
You know, Carl, sometimes God likes to bring you to the Red Sea before he gives you your deliverance. And this was definitely their Red Sea event.
That's right. Members of Congress were beginning to desert. People were switching sides. So, 3,000 men trapped with the Delaware River at its back, New Jersey on the other side. Camden, New Jersey is full of Hessians who were German mercenary soldiers, a couple of thousand of them. The Hessians had earned a reputation for themselves in a battle called Brooklyn Heights, where they had just massacred, they shot prisoners, they bayoneted civilians. They just horrible, merciless, murderous soldiers. And we were scared to death of them, quite frankly. And we had them at our backs on the other side of the river. The river is icing up. The British are closing in on us from both sides, from New York and from Boston. Well, here comes Christmas. You know, at that time, Christmas wasn't celebrated in this country. Right. We considered it a papal abomination. So there we are, and Washington goes on with this crazy plan. He just gets this plan in his head, and nobody's going to talk him out of it. And several people tried to. Glover tried to. Knox tried to. I said, no, this is the one chance we have. This is all we've got. Gates is nowhere to be found. He was supposed to be reinforcing Washington, and he never even showed up. Anyway, in the middle of the night, on Christmas night, George Washington crosses the Delaware River with his 3,000 men, but only 1,000 make it. Here's Gideon again. Exactly. Only 1,000 make it. The rest get hung up in the ice floe, and they can't get their boats across. Wow. So it is an ice storm. If you've ever been in an ice storm, it's like little trinkles of ice, freezing rain coming down. It makes noise everywhere. It hits the trees, it makes noise. It hits the road, it makes noise. But it covered Washington's advance down that road. Nobody saw him because of the weather. Nobody heard him because of the weather. And of course, they were all drunk. They had been celebrating Christmas and sleeping in late. There were outbuildings. There were troops in the outbuildings. We took care of them quietly. They never even knew we were there until it was too late. Come Sunday morning, sunup, we have got the sun in their eyes. We have surrounded the village of Camden. Knox opens fire with his cannon. And in 45 minutes, it's all over. We took over 1,000 prisoners. There was 1,000 German Hessians killed. Their commanding officer was killed. Their supplies, their guns, their ammunition, their food, clothes, everything that Washington desperately needed, he got. Plus, the army was saved. We had won a great victory. It breathed life back into the revolution. The Congress decided to win this. Wow, maybe we can win this thing. And other nations began to think, wow, maybe we can win this thing. And so we started getting support from Britain's enemies, money from Spain. And so we winter quarter it in Valley Forge. And Valley Forge was one of the worst winters on record. That ice storm was, the Germans were professional soldiers, and even though they had laid down on the job, we managed to get in because of that ice storm. Just as an aside, King George was a German. And the reason the Hessians were used so much is because he had all those German connections. But anyway, I should mention that George Washington's losses were 0. So Valley Forge is another great miracle. That bad winter, everybody thought it was such hardship, and it certainly was, but it was important that it be so. Those men and boys, some of them as young as 15, who toughed it out during that winter, in some cases with no shoes, some cases with no food. But it made us tough, and it made us strong. That's just the winter.
Okay, all right, so there's so much to talk about here. There's so much to talk about. The Hessians are the Assyrians. The Hessians, we know for a fact, are the Assyrians. They lived in the area. They lived in the area over there in Bohemian, Austria area, and we knew from history that they were the Assyrians. So it's really interesting that here we are in this country fighting the Assyrians. There's so much in here that he mentioned that we could talk about how Gideon went through the same thing as Gideon. So he had 3,000 troops that out of 20, right? And so when he goes to cross the Delaware, he can only get 1,000 people across. He can't. The other 2,000 didn't make it. Gideon again. So he went from 20,000 troops down to 1,000 troops. Now he's going over to fight the greatest military men in all of Europe, which were the Assyrians. These were tall, blonde-haired, blue-eyed men. Okay, very, very tall. And so interesting because the Hessians, it just happened to be Christmas for them. So they were celebrating. So they weren't even expecting. They weren't expecting George Washington. You see what I'm saying? So it's really, the whole story is just a miracle that it happened the way it did, and that they were able to get in there with 1,000 men, very little weapons of any sort, and be able to take them down, and have 0 people that they lost. They didn't lose one person. Out of the 1,000, not one of them died. Now, that's a true miracle. I'm telling you, these are the stories that and you're going to see more, because I've got a couple of more of these.
And
now we're going to talk about the vision of George Washington. All right, so I'm going to spend just a little time on this, okay?
after Valley Forge, things would be completely different. Now, the spiritual aspect of Valley Forge was something else again. Washington was probably at his lowest ebb during the war. Didn't have enough of an army. The desertions were going on all the time, and he prayed often. He was seen praying. He would pray in his office. He would pray in the field. He would oftentimes just go off riding by himself. And a couple of times he was seen in the snow. You've seen that very famous picture of him on one knee praying beside his horse. Well, I'll tell you what I know about the man. It wouldn't have been one knee. It would have been both knees. And maybe with his face down in the snow. He was that humble. Now, something happened there which changed Washington forever. And I've read 6 biographies on the man, and every author mentions this encounter with a spirit being. While he was in his headquarters, praying actually, the event was recorded and eventually released by Lieutenant Anthony Sherman, who said he was there and saw them. See, the first thing he made notice was that his commanding officer was at a point, he looked almost suicidal sometimes. He was really depressed, in serious depressions, suffering from bouts. Sometimes he would go into his quarters and he wouldn't come out for days. I mean, it was that bad. He was on the verge of a mental breakdown. He's in prayer, and a woman appears in front of him. And at first he's upset because he's given orders that he should not be disturbed. He says, what are you doing here? And she says, son of the Republic, look and learn. And then he sees this vision. And it's basically common knowledge that has been deleted from all the history books. But it played such an important part. And I believe if there was ever a man in the modern era that God would break his silence and give him a message when he needed it most, it would have been George Washington at that particular time. He needed it more than anything else. And the angel in vision shows him not only that he will win the revolution, but how he will win the revolution. And then a continent will flourish from sea to sea, and how we will fight a war amongst ourselves, and how the Republic will survive that war, and we will all come back together again as brothers. And then it goes on to describe in the latter days the entire world coming against the United States of America when the heavens open up and God intervenes and we beat back the enemies of God and the nation and the world. And this wonderful kingdom of God is established here on earth. And it's all in this vision. Things he could not possibly have known.
Exactly.
He could not have known about the Civil War. But George Washington was given the end of these things. Now, 2/3 of that have come to pass. I have no reason to believe that the third portion of that will not come to pass. I believe that vision was seen by George Washington. At any rate, getting back to the story, George Washington walks out of that room a different man. His aides are outside. He walks up to his officers. He's jovial again. He's speaking to them. He told them of this wonderful vision that he had just received. He is upbeat. He has hope. He has more than hope. He has the hope that comes from knowing. He knows what's happening now. He knows that everything he's worked for and given his life for is going to pay off because God has just told him that it will.
Yes, indeed.
And in fact, the whole war turns around from that point on. After Valley Forge, things would be completely different. Now, the spiritual aspect of Valley...
I got to hit the button to take you to the next one. All right, so that's not what I want. Okay, hang on just a second. All right, here's the one I want. This is the actual vision. We're going to play this because there's 3 perils. The first one talked about the American Revolution, how we'd win it. The second one talked about the Civil War. This is the third peril.
Vision of Washington at Valley Forge. This account was told by a gentleman named Anthony Sherman, a veteran of the Continental Army and a man who supposedly heard these words firsthand from General George Washington. While the authenticity of this account is debated, its overall message of hope, faith, and unity is sorely needed in our day. This afternoon, as I was sitting at this table, something in the apartment seemed to disturb me. Looking up, I beheld standing opposite me a singularly beautiful being. Presently, I heard a voice saying, "Son of the Republic, look and learn." Then, my eyes beheld a fearful scene. From several continents arose thick black clouds that were soon joined into one. And throughout this mass there gleamed a dark red light, by which I saw hordes of armed men. These men, moving with the cloud, marched by land and sailed by sea to America. As my ears listened to the thundering of the cannon, clashing of the swords, and the shouts and cries of millions in mortal combat, I again heard the mysterious voice saying, "Son of the Republic, look and learn." Instantly, a light as of 1,000 suns shone down from above me and pierced and broke into fragments the dark cloud which enveloped America. An angel, upon whose head shone the word Union, and who bore our national flag in one hand and a sword in the other, descended from the heavens attended by legions of white spirits. These immediately joined the inhabitants of America, who I perceived were well nigh overcome, but who immediately, taking courage again, closed up their broken ranks and renewed the battle. Instantly the dark cloud rolled back, together with the armies it had brought, leaving the inhabitants of the land victorious, while the bright angel cried with a loud voice, "While the stars remain and the heavens send down dew upon the earth, so long shall the Union last." The scene instantly began to fade and dissolve, and I found myself once more gazing upon the mysterious visitor, who in the same voice I had heard before said, "Son of the Republic, what you have seen is thus interpreted. Many will come upon the Republic, but the whole world united shall not prevail against her. Let every child of the Republic learn to live for his God, his land, and Union." With these words, the vision vanished, wherein had been shown me the birth, the progress, and the destiny of the United States.
Get my free ebook at mcnaughtonfreebook.com/2021.
Okay. All right, I got to get out of that. Okay. Now we're going to get to the last set of miracles that happens. Okay, so let's do that.
After Valley Forge, we win battle after battle after battle. Saratoga, and the war shifts down to the south. There's the Battle of Cowpens, and then there's Guilford Courthouse. The war shifts to the south. Gates is engaged in a battle with the British, and when the troops begin to lose, there's a battle, he gets on his horse and he leaves his troops in the field and runs his horse to death 160 miles to the rear. Nathaniel Greene takes over the army. George Washington is marching south. The governments were Tory governments, tried to make a separate peace with Britain, and the people would not allow it to happen. The people were the heroes. At any rate, the American army is forced to retreat, and the British are right behind them. Cornwallis is chasing the American army. The Americans cross the Catawba. What happens when Cornwallis reaches the river's edge? Torrential rains come up and wind squalls come up, and he can't cross the river. The river is now over the heads of his men. They got no boats. They have to sit there and wait 24, 48 hours until the rains stop and the river goes down. Then they cross. Meanwhile, the Americans are long gone. And then they come to the Dan River and the Yadkin River. The same scenario occurs a couple of weeks apart from each other. The Americans cross in relatively calm waters. The minute the British come up to these rivers, one by one, torrential rains come down, the rivers swell, and the British can't get across. So the Americans are able to go forward, link up with Washington, and they force the British onto the Yorktown Peninsula. The British are dug in, and we have their backs to the Chesapeake Bay. The York River and the Chesapeake Bay is really cutting off Cornwallis's retreat. Washington now holds the advantage in men and materials. The British have their fleet again coming to their rescue. The British get into the Chesapeake Bay. They can't get up the river because the winds are constantly blowing against them. So here we are. Enter the French. The French show up at the last minute. And although they have a smaller fleet than the British, they are able to defeat the British. The British fleet has just been neutralized. Now, Cornwallis says, I've got to get out of here. I've got to cross the York River. But God had other ideas. In the dead of night, Cornwallis takes half his army. He's going to cross the York River and escape. He crosses the river, and he gets about half his troops across, and at about 2 a.m., a storm comes up. Another storm. I mean, this is getting to be, ordinary.
They should have figured it out by that time, shouldn't they?
As a matter of fact, the diaries of British troops tell the story. They knew they were on the wrong side of this one. So early in the morning, just before sunup, the storm stops enough so that he calls the remainder of his men who are on the other side back. So there they are, stuck. It's over. Checkmate.
Okay, so now I'm going to stop this. Okay. I'm going to go back up here. I got to find the place. Here it is. I'm going to bring this back up. Right here, this was written by Ezekiel around 597 BC, and it was fulfilled. What I just showed you was fulfilled right here, because it's impossible for it to be referring to the old land of Israel, because they had already gone into captivity. And it also tells you in the same chapter that they're surrounded by all the nations come against them. That did not happen in the Middle East. That cannot be referring to them. It's impossible. And so this is what he said right here, which is Ezekiel 16:6. And when I passed by thee, I saw thee polluted in thy own blood. And that's what he's talking about, was the American Revolution. And I said unto thee, thou wast in thy own blood. He was in the middle of the war. And he passed by him and he says, live ye. So he wanted the nation to live. And so he's the one that won that war. And he's the same God that won the war for Gideon. And you saw the Gideon over and over and over in this whole story, but nobody tells this story. Nobody remembers their youth. Nobody remembers what these people were like at this time, that all of these people gave up their homes and their property that were in Congress at that time and lost all of it. They lost all of it. They lost their homes. They lost everything they had. They gave it all up to start this country, okay? Because they saw the importance. And even when they were given a chance to just, I'll just wipe it all clean. All you have to do is stay as a commonwealth. You can rule yourself. They were still said no to it, because there was a spirit in them that told them they needed to fight for this. And so interesting that he won it. The whole war was won with just a fragment of a small bunch of people. I mean, that's all it was. And this story is not told because people do not know what truly transpired in the American Revolution. They don't know. And it says, and I said unto thee, when thou was in thy blood, live. That was the second one, which is the War of 1812. And the same thing happened if you go through 1812. This man has written a book called The War of 1812, where he goes through all the miracles that happened in that one. And I have that. Actually, I have that teaching also, where he teaches, Carl Dillenbach teaches the War of 1812 and the miracles that happened. So it's not by accident. It's not by accident. These verses are actually talking to America. And then you have two other proofs when it talks about there's a whirlwind that comes off, and it's talked about in Isaiah chapter 23. There's a whirlwind. Well, Israel in the Middle East has never seen a whirlwind. That word whirlwind means hurricane. They've never had a hurricane. So who is the country that has the hurricane that comes in the south, which it talks about how it comes into the south? And then you have the other scripture, which is in Ezekiel chapter 13, where it says the forest of the south. It says the forest of the south, and it's talking about Israel in the Middle East. In the south is a desert. The southern part of Israel in the Middle East has the Negev desert. And so half of that whole area, the whole southern part of Israel, is a desert. It's not a forest. So who is this written to? Because obviously the book of Ezekiel could not be have written to Israel in the Middle East. It couldn't. And so it lines up perfectly with all the things we've studied about prophecy. The vision of George Washington lines up perfectly. I mean, they didn't tell the whole story that there's a captivity and many other things that went on, but it tells how the Messiah, when he returns, sets it all back up again. And so it's interesting that we have all this information, and it's written. They even have the vision of George Washington. They have that written in the Smithsonian. They all know it happened. You see, they all know it happens. So this is what they fulfilled, and the Father intended for them to fulfill it, and that's Isaiah 50 verse 1. I don't have it up on the screen, but I'm going to read it to you. Where is the bill of your mother's divorcement, whom I have put away? Or which of my creditors is of whom I have sold you? For your iniquities have been sold yourself, and your transgressions is your mother put away. So he's telling you your mother was put away. Well, our mother was England. And so he's telling you the mother was put away and that you gave her a writing of divorcement. See, he had to fulfill these verses. The Father had to fulfill these verses. And what is that writing of divorcement? Somebody tell me.
The Declaration of Independence.
The Declaration of Independence. Thank you very much. They sent it to England and said, we now declare that we are a nation, that we are an individual nation. And so that was the bill, that was the actual document. And it was a divorce. They were divorcing themselves from their mother. Because whoever divorces themselves from their mother, it has to be us divorcing ourselves from Britain, which is what we did. The scriptures are all there. They all support the stuff that we teach. There's nobody wants to hear it, and they don't believe it because they can't believe that the God that they serve does miracles like this. They can't believe it. And, that's just where we are.